Today I'm going to explain a game I had versus a National Master rated 2270 and how I beat him in just 7 moves. So the game started with e4 and I'm black. I played c5, the Sicilian defense. He played knight to f3, knight to c6, then d4. Pawn takes, knight takes, and then d6. He plays knight to c3, I play knight to f6, bishop to g5, and then g6. The game is relatively normal right now, all standard theory, until he plays the move, which I still don't understand what he was trying to do. He plays queen to f3. Now, even if this doesn't hang a knight, which it does, this move still accomplishes pretty much nothing. But he just hangs a knight and then resigns, because there's nothing he can do in this position. He's just down a clean knight, and he will eventually lose. Now, I offer him a rematch, and he declines, and I would too, but he presses play again for a new game at the same time I do, and we both get matched again in the pairing pool. Now, this is the second game where I faced this same National Master, and here's how it turned out. So this is now my second game against this same National Master, and I'm white in this game, so I play d4 to start. He continues with g6, then e4, then bishop to g7, and this is now the modern defense. Now against this, I like to have this specific setup where I have a strong center and then eventually trade the bishops, because that's basically the strongest part of black's setup, and without it, it kind of falls apart. So takes, and then I protect my center pawn with the f-pawn and also disallow the knight from coming here to try to take my bishop. He castles, and I play knight to c3, protecting my center even more. He plays knight to c6, and I play h4 because I want to start some sort of attack with h4, g4, and he plays knight to h5, basically saying I just stop protecting this pawn. The square, and he's going to try to infiltrate. So I stop that with knight g to e2, and he goes e5. I go d5, and he decides he's willing to lose a pawn after takes, and then because he realizes that now he's sacrificed a pawn, but he's infiltrated with the knight. I decide to take his bishop first before moving my knight out of the way. He takes back, and I move my rook up 1 square because it couldn't have gone to this square because of the bishop. And coming this way would have allowed this pawn to be taken. So my only move is rook to h2. He takes my bishop, which was kind of his whole idea to stop me from castling. He goes queen to f6, which I just ignore and go h5. He goes b6, and basically I should have taken and tried to make some sort of an attack with bringing the rooks over, but instead I decide to run my king over. I get checked, and I decide to manually castle here because I didn't like that my king was out in the open. He attacks my queen, and I infiltrate with the queen, although there's no real mate here. There's potential threats of bringing all the major pieces over and trying to checkmate. He tries to trade queens, and I miscalculate by taking. I thought that if takes and takes, it comes with a check. So if he takes back the pawn with either of his king or his rook, then I could take his queen back on the next move. But actually, if he were to take my queen here and I take this, he doesn't have to take back the pawn. Instead, he can move his king up, just guarding the queen. And I didn't see that in my calculation, so I thought that if he takes, I was just going to be winning a pawn. But I don't think he saw that either, so he just took my pawn back. I didn't want to trade queens because I'm trying to attack. He tries to trade queens again. I back up. So now he plays rook to d2, which is a very good move because he's creating counterplay on my weak king. I bring my rook over, which was a mistake because now if he plays something like rook to c8, he can ignore the attack on his king because he has some sacrificial ideas like rook takes here. If my king takes, then because his rook is here, he can just take the knight and get a perpetual or checkmate me. Now, he goes here instead to protect the pawn, And here I probably should have gone back to protect against those threats, but I didn't. I moved my rook up, and now he's slightly better because of this whole idea of attacking my king with his queen. Now here I play f4, which the computer really doesn't like, because it sees that after this check and my king moving over, he can just take this pawn, but I move over and he does not take this. Instead, he takes the pawn, missing that if he would have sacrificed here, this is super dangerous for me and I could easily get mated. But instead, he takes the pawn, and then I move my queen, attacking the bishop and the rook, and it's impossible to say both. So he takes this pawn with the bishop, counterattacking my rook as I attack his. I then take the rook, but now I'm up a knight, and he has a rook and a queen, and I have a rook and a queen, but also a knight. He moves, and I play this move where I go f5, because if he takes with this pawn hangs. If he takes with the queen, which he does, I get this pawn, and now I'm attacking his rook, and my own rook will get into the game, and it's very dangerous for black. He moves his rook over, I move my rook to e1, he attacks my queen, I give him a check, and I play a3 to give luft for my king, and here I play rook to e7, and he plays a5, trying to potentially go here so he can get some perpetual checks. I give him a check, and then I start to push my pawn so I can promote. He gives me a check. This check I've blundered because after my next move, king to a1, he has rook to f1 check, and I have to block with my knight because the a2 square is covered by the queen. And then all of a sudden he can start actually attacking me with these sorts of ideas, and I have to be the one going for some sort of perpetual check on his king. But he just sacrifices his rook instead, and it's important to note he only has 17 seconds left, so this would probably be a normal response. I take, and he tries to go for a perpetual check, but I have this very nice block with my queen, which checks his king and his queen, and there's no way to avoid trading queens, and then it's over because I will promote and I have a rook. So he resigns, and that's how I beat this National Master twice. You should subscribe, and if you have any ideas for future videos, please tell me in the comments.